Welcome, foolish mortals. For today, I will be discussing the 2003 The Haunted Mansion, starring Eddie Murphy, Terrence Stamp, Nathaniel Parker, Marsha Thomason, Jennifer Tilly, and Wallace Shawn, directed by Rob Minkoff. It is I, Scott, here to discuss you with this movie. Now, I have seen this movie before, and back in the day, and was it as good as I remember? Well, I don't know. Let's get into this movie and you'll see, because I remember going to theaters for this years ago. We and I just realized it's been 20 years. What am I talking about? We begin with the montage of what happened to Master Gracie, played by Nathaniel Parker, and his fiancee Elizabeth from way back in the day, like around 1600s, and how they became ghosts while the opening credits rolled. And I honestly wish there was a narration, as that would have worked so much better than it is. Workaholic Jim Evers, played by Eddie Murphy, is a real estate shows a married couple named the Colemans, while the day is his anniversary of marriage, and he meets with a couple of married couples and misses his anniversary with his wife Sarah, played by Marsha Thomason, and thinks about going to a lake for the weekend with their kids Michael and Megan. And this is the most predictable plot I've ever seen Eddie Murphy do, while he distances himself with the kids, as Michael is afraid of spiders and Megan is much more braver than Michael. And honestly, I don't like these characters, as this is predictable for a Disney theme park ride, and not as successful as Pirates of the Caribbean. And same year as the first movie came out, as this they went down here after Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. Sarah gets a call from Ramsley, played by Terrence Stamp, as he's not looking to sell the mansion, but to make his master feel better after all these years, as he doesn't say it quite yet. But this movie is that predictable, and that's a real problem. Jim, Sarah, Megan, and Michael get to the mansion, and as they enter, they see a giant cemetery in the backyard, which feels weird. And if it were me, I would run away, like, really quick, like, just get out of there, that kind of thing. As Jim and Sarah are there to sell the mansion, and it starts to rain, and they enter the mansion and meet Ramsley. Oh God, I'm scared for what's going to happen next. And how many times after Superman with Christopher Reeve has Terrence Stamp played a villain, as it's too obvious? It's not funny, as this is a bad idea to make this a plot of a movie about a theme park ride at Disney World and Disneyland, as it feels terrible. And the Evers family meet Master Gracie and have dinner with him, and this dinner scene is absolutely uncomfortable, while Gracie brings up ghosts, and Ramsley says the storm has gotten worse, and they have no choice but to stay for the night. And the movie is still making bad choices, and I'm about 25 minutes into the movie, and Jim and Sarah have an argument, as Ramsley gets to Jim to talk with Gracie, as he makes himself a drink and goes in a twisted door where it will trap him. And the lighting in this movie is pretty bad, as is this dialogue, which is a real shame. Michael sees a blue light, and Megan believes they should follow it, while Sarah sees a maid who doesn't respond to her after asking where Jim is at, and goes to the library and sees Gracie and have a conversation about Elizabeth and how she looks like her. And this has scary moments for sure, but too scary for kids. And like the next movie, this should have been a PG-13 rated movie, as some of the scenes seem a bit too scary for the smaller kids. Jim goes to a room from room to room and sees a dead version of his face. He gets another room and sees Madame Leota, played by Jennifer Tilly, who's pretty scary as this character. And Jim gets Jim to float in the chair, which isn't that fun in my opinion, while Michael and Megan sees Elizabeth, as it looks like their mother, and they meet Ezra, played by Wallace Shawn, and Emma, who are the maids. These two are horrible in this movie, and as I liked Wallace Shawn as the voice of Rex from the Toy Story films, as he bumps into Megan and Michael as they learns Sarah is in trouble, and by he, I'm talking about Jim, and is about to become the wife of Gracie while still married to Jim. And the real problem is this story is ludicrous, and the writing is completely awful. While Madame Leota tells Jim, Megan, Michael, Ezra, and Emma to get to a key in order to get Sarah out of a marriage that feels completely forced, and they bump into a few statues as they sing and don't give them information about where the key is, and the statues look dopey. And Megan finds the temple of where the key is at, and after Megan reads Latin, Jim goes inside alone while Megan does join behind him and helps him out, and Jim pushes the door of the casket and tries to grab the key, which looks pretty stinking dumb. As these scenes are bad, while Jim loses the key and fights off a dead body with Megan getting the key from underwater, and they get out thanks to Michael getting over his fear of spiders. And I'm getting kind of bored in this 90-minute movie, which is a real shame. Jim goes in a room and finds out Ramsley was responsible for killing Elizabeth in the beginning of the movie, while he explains his plot to make Gracie marry Sarah. And he tries to fight Ramsley, and I mean Jim, while he's a ghost, and throws Jim out of there and locks him out of as Gracie tells Sarah to marry him, as he's led to believe he's Elizabeth. And these effects look pretty bad. Ramsley forces Sarah to marry Gracie while Jim tries to break in and eventually breaks in by car thanks to Madame Leota, and the music of the wedding theme on the piano just sounded really ugly. I couldn't stand it. That piano player should be fired for that. And if it were my wedding, I wouldn't use that. I would scrap that, like right out of the stinking gate. And these scenes are just horrible. Sarah almost marries Gracie and gets Michael and Megan out of a box. Ramsley trapped with them with it earlier. And they get to the wedding room, and Jim says he has a few objections and shows Gracie the letter Elizabeth wrote many years ago. And Ramsley stole it and lied to Gracie after all these years. And this action is not action-packed, it's stupid, and the CGI looked really bad. And Ramsley goes to hell, excuse my French, but that's what it's called, and takes Jim with him. And Gracie helps Jim up as Ramsley dies, and Sarah is poisoned, and the blue light appears again to heal Sarah from the poison. And she wakes up and sees Elizabeth as a ghost and kisses him briefly, and Jim interrupts it and brings Sarah alive, and Gracie tells the family to keep the mansion, and Gracie takes Elizabeth, Ezra, and Emma with them as well as the other ghosts, and they go to the lake with Madame Leona and the statues with them. And this climax is really just awful. Just, awful! Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 2.8 out of 10. The plot is predictable, as the actors' characters are absolutely terrible as they filmed it in. It makes one bad choice after another about a ride at a Disney theme park ride, and is a step down after Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. The choices being made in this movie are pretty bad, while this is a ghostly mess of a movie, and like the next movie, this should have been rated PG-13 with jokes being toned down, but unfortunately it's PG rated, which doesn't make sense because the ride is pretty scary, and I was frightened as a kid of that ride. The story is ludicrous, and the writing is completely awful, and it does a really bad job on the effects, as well as entertaining me, which it didn't, as Jennifer Tilly is the only scary thing about this movie, which tells you how bad this movie is, as it's a solid non-recommendation, and hopefully the new movie does a better job than this movie did. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Haunted Mansion, the 2023 version, and until then, say goodbye to the mansion, and you will be back.